for kilowatt hour is pretty different between those two. In some cases, we've done very good compared to our neighbors. The difference that we have is we do not have a green source of base load power that we can get the same way that states that have a lot of hydroelectric have. And so we have a network that's largely built on coal. 80-some-odd% of our energy generated in Missouri comes from coal-fired power plants. Now, I don't have to tell anybody in this room what the Obama administration has done to the cost of operating a coal plant over the last 7 years. That cost, if the president's carbon plan goes into effect, is going to go up dramatically from where it is today. In my view, that's nothing more than an effort to try to level the playing field between the East Coast and the West Coast, where they're largely not dependent on coal, and the coal we have here in the Midwest. Natural gas has provided a very good option to address some of that. But whether natural gas continues to be as cheap as it is today going forward, particularly when we're going to start exporting some of it, starting at the beginning of 2017, I think is an open question. What we've tried to do in terms of regulatory policy in Missouri is to try to create an environment where our investor-owned utilities are making prudent investments, necessary investments, before those get rolled into the cost of rates. In some cases, that system seems to be working very well. In others, it doesn't. So I think you're going to see some effort this year to try to reform our regulatory environment for investor-owned utilities in a way that allows them to continue to make investments, but also set some caps on how much rates can grow year over year. Because the biggest problem we've got is a company like Ameren or KCP&L will come in repeatedly for double-digit rate increases. And I don't think anybody wants to see those kinds of rate increases continue. I think everybody would better off if they could make more regular, consistent investments, but at the same time keep rates within a range that's, or at least growth in rates in a range that's acceptable. So the biggest thing we can do right now to keep energy costs low in Missouri is to fight tooth and nail to not have the president's carbon plan implemented. If that happens, every single consumer in the state of Missouri is going to pay more, and not just more, but dramatically. Yeah.
And then a follow-up, the legislature has mandated to the utility companies the energy investment charge, energy efficiency investment charge.
Yes.
Which on my bill is about $5.
Yes.
Ends up being about $11 million it's collected. There's a choice there, and then the way it's structured is that there are certain people who can take advantage of the credit offered by the utility company while everybody else is footing the bill because they can't afford the down payment for the equipment for which the credit is granted. So we have a neighbor stealing from neighbor, basically. And then it's also unfair in that it treats generation, emphasizes generation of electricity rather than conservation of electricity.
Right.
The credit is $2 per kilowatt. Typical systems are 10 kW on the road, which means that you get a credit for $20,000, and the electricity is only produced when the sun shines.
Right.
But you can get a credit for a ground source heat pump of $2,000,
Right.
which pumps out energy, heating and cooling, 24/7, 365, at 300% efficiency.
Yeah, a lot of that policy was put in place through a ballot measure that the public ultimately voted for back in 2006, 2008, and I may not have the date exactly right. So let me take a look at that policy, because certainly from what you're describing, it doesn't sound like it makes a whole lot of sense. We do know this: the cheapest way to produce energy is not to use it.
There you go. And then the policy should be directed toward the citizens to take the right action.
Yeah.
Given the opportunity, people will reduce their costs.
Well, and give the market the opportunity to do it.
That's right.
Because I don't care how much you try to force me to buy compact fluorescent light bulbs. I was not going to do it until the cost of those light bulbs got to the point where I made a market choice, say, okay, it's now worth it for me to buy a compact fluorescent light station. Same thing is happening with LEDs right now. As the cost comes down, people, you know what, they're making a smart choice for themselves. And they made that smart choice without anybody from the federal government having to tell them, you've got to go buy a LED or a compact fluorescent light.
Well, that's also because they found out that the ones that they're supposed to be buying, they can't just throw it in their trash can.
Yeah, they didn't
And
like
they
it.
can't even be made here in the United States because they're so toxic.
Right.
They're also finding out that they put a toxic smell out in the air on them, so that's why people are looking at LEDs.
Yes, ma'am.
Could you maybe be a little more specific about what you meant about the use of charter schools to increase competition and holding schools more accountable? Because I think schools are pretty well and teachers are held more accountable than they ever have been in history. And when we're talking about these troubled schools, we're usually talking about high poverty areas. So the pressure that teachers are under to perform, and then if you go in and fire all the teachers. First of all, it's really difficult to get teachers in these areas to begin with. I know I now another state, went down to New Orleans, just got to tour school, and in talking to the counselor who was giving me the tour, he was willing to hire me on the spot. Didn't know me from Adam, but that's how hard it is to get teachers in these areas in these troubled schools. So I'm wondering how the government's going to go in and fix this with the magic plan. And as far as charter schools, all the research I've read, they usually do not perform as well as public schools. In a lot of cases, perform worse.
There's good charter schools and bad.
Charter.
Really? I haven't.
A lot of research that Diane Ravitch has done. She worked under Reagan and his Department of Education, and they don't perform as well as the general public thinks that they do.
There are good charter schools and bad charter schools. There's no question about that. And I don't think that nobody could legitimately question your opinion that some of them do not get the job. What I think, to me, it's not as much about holding individual teachers accountable or individual schools accountable as it is trying to do something that's a little different than what we've always done. In some of those districts that have been failing, not just for a year or two, but persistently failing, doing something a little different, I think, is worth the effort. What we try to create in Missouri is a fairly contained charter school law. Allows charter schools to go into those persistently failing school districts. We've also put in place now some of the most rigorous standards for charter schools that any state has. And that was born out of an experience we had in St. Louis where we had some really, really poor charter schools. We had the Imagine Academy up in St. Louis, which was an abject disaster. I think it was a company out of California that wanted to be a profit center more than they wanted to be a school. So certainly when you look at the data from the Imagine Academies, you're going to find that record of charter schools to be a disaster. By contrast, and look, there's some people that don't think the model particularly works, but the KIPP academies, which are there in St. Louis now, have a pretty good track record of success. Charter schools aren't going to be the answer to every problem because not every kid's going to go to a charter school. So I don't mean to say that it's the magic bullet or the panacea to fix all of our problems, but to the extent that we can find an outlet that works for some kids in those abjectly failing districts, I think it's working.
Well, my point is, like, if you put the vouchers in place,
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with somebody being able to choose, if they're trapped in a bad area, being able to send their child to a better performing school.
Right.
I don't think as many parents are going to take advantage of that as we would like to think, unfortunately. And I know that because as a teacher,
Yeah.
there are parents that I do not hear from all year long, and I cannot get in touch with them either,
I
okay?
talked to a good
But that's not the teacher or the school's problem. That is a social problem that we have in the school.
Exactly, so
In this
if
country.
It's-
schools
it's-
right now and teachers that are under the pressure they're under right now can't fix the problem, how will the government be able to step in and fix the problem is my question.
We're not going to be able to fix the problem. What we can do is try to create the environment and policies, right? I know you're right. I talked to a friend of mine who teaches government at Poplar Bluff High School the day after he had parent-teacher conferences. And the only reason I knew his parent-teacher conferences is we have kids in school and we had ours the same night. I said, how are parent-teacher conferences? He teaches a full course load. He had 9 parents.
Sure.
9
Yes.
out of, I don't know, probably well over 100 students that came parent-teacher conference. So there's no doubt there could be more parental involvement, that'd be a big help to the system.
Yeah, because even when you said the rural schools, we have some rural schools now failing. I bet that if we look deeper and look, there were probably maybe areas where there was some large manufacturing or something that closed. Those people are now thrown into poverty. Poverty has a large, in Diane Ravage's research, it has a large chunk to do with
No
schools'
question.
performance, students' performance. We were just talking today at the table about a family of 8 that since they left us, the end of last year, the kids have been in 5 different schools.
Yeah, the problem with people not being consistently in school is a big part of the problem, and there's no question that the economic factors play a part. But as policymakers, we're gonna continue to have to try to find ways that we can improve education, even at the lowest ends of the socioeconomic spectrum, because if we don't, we're gonna continue to have areas where we breed more poverty, where we breed more crime. And so, I don't know that anybody knows what the answer is. If anybody had figured it out by now, every state would probably have implemented. But to me, we've got to continue to provide options for those parents who do want some choice. And those are the parents that we want to be helping and giving some options.
But
Yes, ma'am.
how much money did we spend on busing in St.
Through
Louis?
the entirety of the DSEG program, I don't have any idea about a lot.
Right. And that wasn't really on education, it was on,
Yeah,
I think we could have paid teachers more money.
If you look at how much we're spending per pupil in the state and kind of what that trajectory's been since 1970, and the dramatic increase in per pupil spending and the per pupil spending in St. Louis City and in St. Louis County is dramatically higher than we find here. So there's no doubt we're spending more. We're not seeing a whole lot of difference in educational outcomes as a result of that additional investment.
I think part of that problem also, though, is that St. Louis has one of the largest Bosnian populations of people that, so I know that being from California, we had a lot of Mexicans coming in. We actually had to set up bungalows to teach them their own language,
I'm
and
not
then
sure if we
that
laid,
bumps up.
if you look geographically at where the biggest problems are in education in St. Louis County, I don't think you'd find them to be correlated with where most of the residents have settled in. Now, I'll go back and look,
Okay,
but I don't think so.
because then you have to teach them in their own language to get them to
No,
teach.
most of that's up in the northern part of the city,
Yeah,
it's
Bosnia
not
is
in the
the south.
southern.
It's
part.
not in St. Louis? I heard it
Most
was.
of that's in
It's in the
southern.
city, but it's in the northern part of the city,
Okay.
not.
It's in-
Okay. Well, I just kept hearing
Yeah.
St. Louis.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yes, sir.
Is the Fulton nuclear plant gonna be rebuilt, if it's not, why not?
The existing plant there is going to continue to be maintained, and they continue to, on a regular basis.
Separate those by
review it.
categories.
I do not think in the short term you're going to see an additional
Give my Bible
full-scale
away.
nuclear plant like the one Fulton rebuilt. And I think that's because you've seen the environmental and regulatory hurdles that have to be overcome to build a nuclear plant. It's going to get so onerous and the cost is just out of control. Been a couple of states, I believe Georgia and Florida both have done recent large-scale nuclear power plant projects. Every one of them has had pretty significant cost. I think where the big opportunity happens in nuclear over the next several years is probably small, what they call modular nuclear reactors, where you can take and you can do, maybe a 100 megawatt plant, and you can put it close to where you need the power.
I don't know why that hasn't been done long before, because nuclear submarines use the modular power plant,
I
and drop them in,
I talked to
and then that drives the propeller.
I talked to the CEO of Noranda back a couple of years ago, and he said, and he wasn't entirely joking, he said at one point, he made an offer to the Department of Defense to buy a decommissioned nuclear sub, and he was just gonna, park it down there by the river and run a big line out of it, because it's exactly right, the technology is there.
They're disposable too,
Yeah, so I think that's where the future is, but a large-scale plant, probably not there. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, this is very informative, it really is, Mr. Speaker, and apologize for coughing, I'm gonna leave by it. Who knows who David Horowitz is? I've got some free pamphlets back here, I cleaned out my office and there's no charge, you can pick them up. He was raised in a communist family, he's one of the top spokesmen on the Middle East and places like that, speaks around to the colleges. And I apologize, I'm gonna have to leave. I apologize for coughing during your presentation, but I got that. I was at Poplar Bluff today, and so I didn't know it took that long to drive over here. And I think my wife,
It'll probably take you a little longer to get back with this one.
Me? My turn? Oh, did you point to something else? I wanted to bring up the topic of smart meters. I don't know how, I know there was a bill last year, and you'll be probably filed again this year. But my concern is that as a consumer and property owner, of course, is safety. First and foremost is the privacy issue of smart meters. And I don't think that people really understand, you know, the depth of the appropriate data collection. And I know my provider is rural electric anyway, they say they're not going to collect the data, but the possibility is there with the smart meter. And so the privacy issue, the safety issue, the fires, and more so are the extortion fees. I want to opt in to what I put on my home. I don't want to have to opt out. And for me to replace, and I think that's a very simple word to change to opt in to a smart meter program. Is right now there probably are smart meters on everyone's home here, and you don't even know it. But electrosensitivity is a very prominent medical condition that is more and more being diagnosed. There was one other thing. Anyway, go ahead and address that.
It's an issue.
On that, let me just say, I mean, I have ringing in my ears, and I kind of wanted to go back to an analog. Ameren Huey was going to charge me $500.
Yes, rural electric is charging me an
Go to
extension
a
fee of
cheaper
$300
meter.
plus a monthly reading fee to go back to an
I mean,
analog. That's extortion.
And then smart meters,
Well,
it's been a big waste of money. If we had in Missouri, rather than investing millions and millions of dollars in solar electricity to increase generation, to put a load on the grid and use ground source heat pumps or air source heat pumps, the load on the grid would have gone down, making smart meters unnecessary, because the purpose of them is to control the consumption of electricity to the grid. It's been a geekazoid computer programmer.
I like climate change.
It's an issue, to be honest with you. I mean, I'm aware that there's been, you know, some discussion on it. It's not an issue.
we stumped him.
You finally got one. I'll tell you what, I'll look into it a little bit.
I'd love to sit
We
and
would
talk
like-
about it. I'll make an appointment, we'll sit
That'd be
and chat
great.
about it,
Yeah.
because I've done a lot of investigation. Electrosensitivity, I'm a nurse, and that is a medical condition.
Hopefully by the time I'm done with 8 years, there will not, I'll be able to get them all. So maybe come back in 3 years, I can tell.
I know that this is not an easy answer to this one, but obviously.
Have any of the others been easy?
Yes, it has been. Well, just wait till you hear this one.
We're an
Now,
educated bunch, aren't we?
Obviously, the social issues that we have facing us all over the country, but let's take Missouri, because it's bad. You know, we've got riots in Ferguson, we've got poop swastikas in, you know, in Mizzou.
That's
We
kind
have-
of a lie.
Huh?
That's a lie.
Well, you know, Emmy's son is in that dorm. He physically saw it, so.
That
He's wrong.
picture's been going around for 7 years.
I know that, but he physically saw it. He's in that dorm. I mean, he saw it.
Anyway, what's your
And
question?
the question is, you know, we've got, you know, all this stuff, you know, just respecting the police, the whole Black Lives Matters thing. I mean, things are bad, socially, racially. I mean, I don't know what we can do about it, but I'm throwing that one out there. What can we do?
Turn back to God.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, some of these are certainly going to be things that aren't going to be addressed by government. But I do think we have to start to look at the reasons why people have become so distrustful of law enforcement. And I think if you look at it, it becomes distrustful of government at every single level, and law enforcement's an extension of that. You know, you look at the problems in Ferguson, you know, a big part of it was the way that those local governments were treating their own citizens. You had municipalities in St. Louis County that were generating, in some cases, 65 to 70% of their local government revenue was coming from traffic tickets. I mean, imagine that. The City of Poplar Bluff, I pulled the numbers on this, under 5% of the total city revenue is coming from traffic tickets. I don't know what Cape is, but Cape didn't make, I'm sure, is probably right in the same line. So you start to ask, well, why is a community this distrustful of law enforcement or city government. Well, part of it's because they've been using that community for an ATM to fund the basic operations of government for the last 20 years. That's a problem. So there are things the government can do to try to create that better environment. But ultimately, at the end of the day, government is not going to be able to fix every problem. And communities are going to have to address some of those things, and no easy answer. So,
And it's a matter of perception, please, and also because the density of police officers per acre is higher in the city than it is out here. And whenever I run into a police officer out here, not figuratively, really, but see him or her, well, I welcome that opportunity to interface with a person that is there to protect me, but the perception in the city is not so.
It's not, and it's a difference that starts at a very young age. I was telling some people in St. Louis County, my son, when he went to kindergarten, the police came to the school, and fire department came to the school, and people from the ambulance district came to the school. And he's going to grow up in an environment to trust and respect and think law enforcement is good. In fact, for about a year, he wanted to be a police officer when he grew up. He's down to a paleontologist now, so I'm not sure that we're in a real realistic phase yet. But that's a very different fundamental understanding of the interaction between community and law enforcement than a lot of people in St. Louis County are going to get. And that's part of it. So law enforcement needs to be supported. I can't think of a more important time for us to continue to support law enforcement, because they are out doing a very, very difficult job, and now doing it in the face of a lot of people who are outwardly opposing. So, history.
Does the state have much responsibility as far as drugs are concerned? Or is that more of a federal issue?
Well, that's an interesting question, because up until recent years, most people have viewed drugs as largely a federal problem, at least what we would categorize as illegal or illicit drugs. Obviously, that conversation is changing. States like Colorado and Washington, among others, have led a charge to really take back state control over marijuana specifically, and the federal government, under the Obama administration, has decided not to enforce federal laws regarding marijuana. So there's a growing conversation on state level in a lot of states about what marijuana policy is going to be. There's also a big conversation, a growing conversation about what we do with drug crimes and drug addiction. We've had a policy, a criminal justice policy that's largely focused on taking drug offenders and throwing them in prison. What we're finding is it's not working. The recidivism rate for drug crimes and people coming out of prison is horrible. So it's one of those areas where the definition of insanity applies. Continuing to do the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, we're not going to get it. So as policymakers, we're going to have to wrestle with some very difficult choices on how we deal with drug abuse and drug addiction. Because there's a huge societal cost. There's a huge governmental cost. Our prisons are largely populated with people that we have there because of drug crimes. Some of those are marijuana crimes, but a lot of them are methamphetamine, and a lot of them are heroin. A growing number of heroin and opiate crimes. So we're not talking about, people who are going out and having a little bit of marijuana. We're talking about some serious hard drug use. And I'm not sure anybody's got a real good handle yet on what the right policy is. But there's a big role for the states to play there. Yes, ma'am.
I had someone found out you were here and they have a question they want me to ask.
Flash flood.
Flash.
We all buzzing.
Yeah. It's not a tornado.
She wants to know whether you will have a comprehensive plan for open oversight of DESI and the state board at the top of your list or not.
I am certainly open to ways to make DESI more open and transparent. And what we need to do to execute that, I'll be glad to take some input and direction from anybody that's got it. As a general policy matter, we want open, transparent state agencies, whether that's DESI or the Department of Natural Resources or any other. Open, transparent state agencies, they ultimately all work for us. It's a policy that we've got. So if there's some things we need to do there to make it more open and transparent, we'll certainly be willing to consider.
part of that comes from oversight.
Well, Don brings up a good point. I mean, one of the things we have really tried to do as a legislature over the past couple of years, when we still have further to go, is to do more oversight of our state departments. It's an important function of the legislature. We focus a lot on passing legislation and new laws, removing old laws, changing existing laws. We spend a lot of time on that effort. We spend a lot of time on crafting a budget. But after we get done with that budget, our posture in the past has largely been to say, pass that budget and then walk away. There's been very little oversight of the state departments after we pass that budget. So one of the things we've been trying to do is to create a structure that allows our appropriation and our budget committees the opportunity to do more oversight and continue to follow up with these departments on a regular basis. Certainly DESI being an example of the department where we've been exercising that for.
I like being here.
Okay, good.
Kind of back to the Mizzou thing.
Yeah.
On that, there was a First Amendment issue with a student reporter
Right.
that was pushed. But it also, if you watch that, the instructors,
Yeah.
professors, whoever that was involved with it, they were directly involved in coaching those students at that time. That just seems kind of strange that they would went to that extent, because they were guiding these students during this protest.
We shouldn't be tolerating a professor at a public institution condoning or suggesting a violation of the First Amendment. And of all the things that we saw play out at Mizzou over the last several weeks, that's one that most frustrated me. It's not the kind of environment that we ought to be promoting there, particularly not the kind of environment that ought to be being created by a media professor with credentials in the department, in the journalism school. I know she lost her credentials with the journalism school. I don't know whether there's going to be further disciplinary action taken there or not.
Because there was 3 or 4 of them directly there, and they were directing the students.
And what was encouraging to me is that, and it's bad that we got put in this position, but you know, Missouri has journalism school graduates that are all over the country. You can't find a newsroom in this country that doesn't have Missouri journalism school graduates. Now, you know, when I get on a rant about the mainstream media and the problems there, I may not want to point to that fact as often. But you had journalists from all over the country who were calling out that professor for exactly what she did wrong. And that shouldn't be the environment anywhere, but it certainly shouldn't be the environment on college campus.
Plus, the reporter was a student.
Yeah.
So they were, you know.
She had privileges at the J school,
Yeah.
which have been removed.
Yeah.
Okay?
She's still working
But
on
she
it.
is a mass she's in the mass
Professor, not J
communication.
school.
She is not in the J school. The mass communication department is for those students who can't get into the J school.
She certainly mass communicated on this.
Yes, she did.
She mass communicated to everybody in the country.
You know, if there's a problem there, it certainly needs addressed.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
this was set up.
Look, there's
This
no
whole thing.
question that the entire episode calls into question the direction of the institution.
Right.
It's my great hope. University of Missouri is an important part of the state. It still is our flagship institution. I want to see it be better than it has been over, at least portrayed over the last several months. So my hope is with the opportunity to get new leadership there, there'll be a new direction.
I think that hurt the school because I think
Unquestionably.
people, they think that they might have saved them $1 million for the football team. But I tell you what, I think that the long term of people sending their kids there, they're gonna see a very big
Damage to the
damage,
reputation,
yes.
damage to the reputation of the school is incalculable.
Yes.
Which leads to my question.
Yes, ma'am.
I read that if they lost 10% of their student population, that would be over $25 million that they would lose. Would the state step in and bail out a school like that if they allowed their own reputation to be damaged?
We have a, you know, the fortunate or unfortunate sometimes thing about state government is we can only spend what we have. And so we can't go just print some more money. My guess is we'll continue to support the University of Missouri, but I'm not going to support an effort to bail them out if that happens. Now, I don't know the numbers, I haven't heard those statistics, But it's important that we continue to make investments across the spectrum of higher education in Missouri. And while the very intensive research-focused mission at the University of Missouri is important, the mission that SEMO is doing is important. The mission at every community college that's providing critical vocational skills training in the state is very important. We're not going to sacrifice those other efforts to bail out the university. My hope is that we
It was reported that one or more of the gentlemen that retired, nice word, had a golden parachute. One of them was $9 million. Do you know anything about that?
I know that there have been some questions raised. I saw some stuff today about the compensation package for the chancellor. My understanding that of the president, his resignation is, and Donna may know more than I do on this front, is that there wasn't a huge compensation package. Now, I know Chancellor Lofton had a contract, which they had to get him out of, but I don't know
He's
what.
still working for the university.
I don't know what the terms of that is.
Okay. Thank you.
I want to be respectful of your time since
No,
you're
it's okay.
traveling. We want to thank,
Oh, man.
Speaker- Well, we have the room until 8:30, so, but completely wanted to be respectful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, and
Thank you for
thanks
coming.
for being involved in the process. It matters. The more people we have involved in the process, and active in government, the better off we'll be. So,
Thank you.
thanks.
Well, we still have an honest gentleman here to pull a ticket. Does anybody want a raffle ticket? 50-50 drawing. Last chance. Mr. Person, how many would you like to have? 5,
And you
6
can
to
sign the
5?
pro-life petition. If you want to see county government, put, their checkbook online, sign that petition. Yes.